Have you ever wondered about the forgotten chapters of American history? The ones so disturbing that they've been systematically erased from our textbooks and collective memory. Tonight, I'll be sharing the horrifying story of Rosewind Plantation in Georgia, 1847. Before we begin, please comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. This channel needs your support to continue bringing these hidden historical horrors to light. In the sweltering summer of 1847, the Rosewind Plantation stood as a crown jewel among Georgia's vast cotton estates. Located 20 miles outside of Savannah, its fields stretched as far as the eye could see, a sea of white cotton under the merciless southern sun. The plantation was owned by the Blackwood family, whose patriarch, Thomas Blackwood, had died mysteriously 3 years prior, leaving his 27-year-old widow, Eleanor Blackwood, to manage the sprawling property alone. Eleanor Blackwood was no ordinary plantation mistress. The daughter of a wealthy Charleston merchant, she had been educated in Europe and possessed an intellect and ambition that both impressed and unsettled those around her. She wore only black following her husband's death, her pale skin a stark contrast against the dark fabrics, earning her the whispered nickname, the Raven Lady, among the slaves and townspeople alike. What few realized was that Eleanor had harbored secrets long before her husband's untimely demise. The documents uncovered in the Savannah Historical Society archives in 1976 revealed a series of private correspondences between Eleanor and various scientific societies across Europe. These letters, yellowed with age and nearly destroyed by water damage, hinted at Eleanor's obsession with human variation and heredity, concepts that wouldn't be formally understood until decades later. "I have reason to believe," she wrote to Professor Heinrich Müller of Vienna in 1845, "that certain human traits can be cultivated through careful selection, much as we breed horses for speed or cattle for meat. My late husband considered my interests unseemly for a lady, but now I am free to pursue my studies without interference." Following Thomas Blackwood's death, Eleanor took an unusual approach to plantation management. While other widowed plantation mistresses typically hired overseers or remarried quickly, Eleanor insisted on maintaining direct control over all aspects of Rosewind. She dismissed the previous overseer, a brutish man named Jeremiah Watts, and began personally supervising the slaves' work, living conditions, and, most disturbingly, their breeding. According to county records, Eleanor made several unusual purchases in the spring of 1846. She attended 3 different slave auctions across Georgia and South Carolina, each time buying only individuals with a specific and rare characteristic, albinism. Albinism, a condition resulting in the absence of pigment in the skin, hair, and eyes, was viewed with superstition and fear in many communities. Slaves with this condition were often sold at lower prices due to their susceptibility to sunburn and vision problems, making them less desirable for fieldwork. Yet Eleanor specifically sought them out, paying premium prices for 6 adult males with the condition. Marietta Daily Journal, June 1846. Curious behavior was observed at yesterday's auction by the widow Blackwood of Rosewind Plantation, who outbid several planters for a male slave of unusual appearance with skin and hair white as snow, despite being of African descent. Mrs. Blackwood has purchased several such oddities in recent months, leading to speculation about her intentions. The slaves with albinism weren't the only unusual additions to Rosewind. Eleanor also hired Dr. Frederick Winters, a physician who had studied in Philadelphia and Europe before establishing a controversial practice in Charleston. Winters had published several papers on human anatomy and physiology that had been dismissed by mainstream medical societies for their radical theories and questionable ethics. A former house slave named Esther, interviewed in the Federal Writers' Project of 1937, recounted the changes at Rosewind after Dr. Winters' arrival. "I was just a girl when the doctor came to stay, maybe 12 or 13. Miss Eleanor gave him the east wing all to himself, and strange crates started arriving at night. We weren't allowed near that part of the house, but sometimes we heard noises, clanking metal, glass breaking, and once a scream so terrible it woke the whole quarter. Miss Eleanor had always been cold, but after the doctor came, there was something different in her eyes when she looked at us. Like we weren't people at all, just things for her to use. Within 6 months of Dr. Winter's arrival, Eleanor had gathered a total of 9 slaves with albinism at Rosewind, 6 men and 3 women. According to plantation records, these individuals were segregated from the other slaves, housed in a specially constructed building near the main house rather than in the slave quarters. They were given different clothing, better food, and were exempt from field labor, a fact that caused resentment and fear among the other slaves. What happened behind the closed doors of this separate housing remains largely undocumented in official records, but fragments of information can be pieced together from various sources. Dr. Winters kept meticulous journals, portions of which were discovered in the 1960s during renovations to the former Plantation house. These journals, now held in the University of Georgia's special collections, paint a disturbing picture of Eleanor's scientific endeavors. Dr. Winter's Journal, October 12, 1846. Mrs. Blackwood's theory regarding the increased physical capabilities of subjects with congenital absence of pigmentation is fascinating, if not aligned with current scientific understanding. She insists that the male subjects in particular demonstrate superior strength when properly nourished and conditioned. To please my patron, I have begun the regimen of dietary supplements and physical training she prescribed. I must admit, the results after just 1 month are surprising. Subject 3 has gained 17 pounds of what appears to be primarily muscular tissue. The dietary supplements referenced in Winter's journal appear to have been a combination of protein-rich foods, crude vitamin extracts, and various herbal concoctions of Eleanor's own design. More disturbing are his casual references to extracts and serums administered to the subjects, the compositions of which are never fully detailed in the surviving journal pages. By early 1847, rumors about strange occurrences at Rosewind had begun to spread throughout Chatham County. Local farmers reported seeing unusually tall, pale figures working in the Rosewind fields after sunset. A traveling salesman claimed to have glimpsed giants white as ghosts, carrying impossibly heavy loads across the plantation grounds. These accounts were generally dismissed as superstitious nonsense or drunken hallucinations. However, shipping records from the port of Savannah confirm that Rosewind's cotton production increased by nearly 40% in 1847, despite no significant increase in the plantation's overall slave population. This dramatic increase in productivity would have required either a substantial expansion of cultivated land or an extraordinary improvement in labor efficiency, neither of which was documented in county agricultural records. The most compelling evidence of what was occurring at Rosewind comes from a journal kept by Isaiah, one of the albino men purchased by Eleanor. This journal, written on scraps of paper hidden in a hollow tree trunk and not discovered until a century later, provides a first-hand account of Eleanor's experiments and their effects on the subjects. From Isaiah's journal, March 1847, "They give us different food than the others, meat 3 times a day, strange bitter drinks, pills that make my heart race. Doc Winters measures us every week. Height, arms, chest, legs. I've grown 2 inches since Christmas, and my arms are so thick I've torn 2 shirts. William is bigger still, almost 7 feet now, and strong enough to lift a wagon by himself. The mistress watches us exercise each day, her eyes gleaming like she's found gold. Last night, she came to my room alone. She touched my skin, my hair, my muscles, all while asking strange questions. Do you feel different? More powerful? Do you dream differently now?" Her hands were cold, but her face was flushed. I feared punishment if I refused her, so I answered as best I could. But there was something in her manner that frightened me more than any whip. Isaiah's journal entries become increasingly disturbing as the year progresses, describing physical changes that defy medical explanation: extreme growth in height and muscle mass, increased visual acuity, despite the eye problems typically associated with albinism, and an unsettling change in temperament among some of the subjects. June 1847. Samuel broke today. We heard him screaming before dawn, words that made no sense. When Doc and Mistress came running, he picked up Doc like a child's doll and threw him against the wall. It took William, Joseph and me to hold Samuel down, while Mistress injected him with something that made him sleep. Later, I heard her tell Doc that Samuel was progressing too rapidly and that they needed to adjust the formula. They took Samuel to the East Wing. We haven't seen him since. The transformation of these individuals was not merely physical. Multiple accounts suggest that Eleanor was conditioning them psychologically as well, using a combination of religious doctrine, superstition, and what we would now recognize as brainwashing techniques to ensure their loyalty. She apparently convinced them that they were chosen by God for a special purpose, that their condition was a mark of divine selection rather than a genetic anomaly. A letter from Eleanor to her cousin in Charleston, dated July 1847, provides a chilling glimpse into her mindset. You cannot imagine the progress we have made. They are magnificent creatures now, powerful beyond ordinary men, yet obedient to my word alone. Frederick says we must proceed with caution, but I see no reason for restraint. We stand at the threshold of a revelation that will transform the very nature of labor and power in our society. And they look at me with such devotion, such wonder. I confess it stirs something in me I had not anticipated. By late summer of 1847, Eleanor's behavior had become increasingly erratic. She withdrew from what little society she had maintained, cancelling her monthly visits to Savannah and turning away even her closest acquaintances when they called at Rosewind. The only outsider regularly admitted to the plantation was Reverend Thomas Harlow of St. John's Episcopal Church, who later wrote in his private diary about the disturbing changes he observed. Reverend Harlow's diary, August 1847. My visit to Rosewind today has left me deeply troubled. Mrs. Blackwood, once a model of refined Southern womanhood despite her unusual intellectual interests, has altered in ways I find difficult to articulate. Her conversation leaps between topics with feverish intensity, and she repeatedly referred to some great work nearing completion. Most concerning was her request that I bless what she called her special servants. I was taken to a building I had not seen before, where I encountered the strangest sight of my life: men and women with skin and hair as white as alabaster, standing nearly 7 feet tall with muscular proportions that seemed almost grotesque. They knelt in perfect unison at Mrs. Blackwood's command, and the look of adoration they gave her was not that of slaves to a mistress, but of worshippers to an idol. I performed the blessing as requested, but have since been unable to shake the conviction that I have been complicit in something unholy. The situation at Rosewind reached a crisis point in early September 1847. According to county medical records, Dr. Winters was found dead in his quarters on the morning of September 3rd, officially recorded as a death from apoplexy, or what we would now call a stroke. However, a letter from Eleanor's housemaid to her sister in Charleston, smuggled out through a sympathetic tradesman, tells a different story. The doctor's neck was broken clean through, his head twisted around backward like a doll's. Mistress had the body taken away before anyone but her and me saw it. She wasn't crying or afraid like you'd expect. She was angry, saying over and over, "I told him not to go in there alone." They buried him that same night in the far corner of the property. No marker, no service. Mistress burned all his papers and locked up his rooms herself. With Dr. Winters gone, Eleanor appears to have accelerated whatever plans she had been developing. Plantation account books show large purchases of chemical compounds from apothecaries in Savannah, Charleston, and as far away as New Orleans. She also commissioned a Savannah jeweler to create several identical silver medallions bearing an unusual design, a combination of what appears to be Egyptian hieroglyphs and alchemical symbols. The medallions were apparently intended for her special servants, as Isaiah's journal mentions, receiving one in late September. Mistress gave each of us a silver disc to wear around our necks today. She said they would protect us from evil influences and keep us bound to her. The metal feels strange against my skin, sometimes hot, sometimes cold. William says his dreams have changed since he started wearing his, that he sees Mistress calling to him across a great distance. As fall progressed, the behavior of Eleanor's experimental subjects became increasingly unpredictable. Isaiah's journal describes Samuel's return from the East Wing greatly changed. Samuel is back with us, but he's not the same. He's bigger than any of us now, his muscles rippling under his skin like snakes. But his eyes are empty, and he doesn't speak anymore. He just follows orders, any orders, without question or hesitation. Mistress says he's perfected, but I look at him and feel only fear. On October 15th, 1847, a slave named Tobias escaped from Rosewind and made his way to Savannah, where he sought sanctuary at St. John's Episcopal Church. His account to Reverend Harlow, recorded in the clergyman's diary, provides the most detailed description of the horrifying changes at the plantation. Tobias spoke of nightmarish scenes, the albino slaves growing to inhuman sizes, some now approaching 7.5 feet tall with strength to match their stature. He claimed Mrs. Blackwood had begun using them to punish other slaves, describing an incident where a field hand accused of stealing was held down by 4 of these white giants, while Mrs. Blackwood herself administered a whipping of unusual severity. More disturbing still were Tobias's claims about Mrs. Blackwood's personal relationships with these individuals. He spoke of her spending nights in their separate quarters, emerging disheveled in the mornings, and of strange rituals involving bloodletting and incantations in languages unknown to him. I would dismiss these as the fantastical imaginings of a frightened mind, but for what I witnessed myself during my last visit. Reverend Harlow's growing concern prompted him to write to Eleanor's cousin in Charleston, suggesting that a family intervention might be necessary. The cousin, James Sullivan, arrived at Rosewind on October 22nd, the last outside visitor to see the plantation before the events that would forever seal its dark legacy. Sullivan's hasty letter to his wife, dated October 23rd, would be the final contemporary account of Eleanor Blackwood. I scarcely know how to describe what I found here. Eleanor is transformed, not merely in her manner, which has taken on an unsettling intensity, but in her very bearing. She speaks of power and destiny, of remaking the world according to her vision. The slaves she calls her children are monstrous in their proportions, their skin and hair as white as Eleanor's is dark. They move with unnatural grace for beings of such size and watch her with absolute devotion. When I expressed my concerns about her welfare and reputation, she laughed in a way that chilled my blood. "Dear cousin," she said, "you cannot imagine what I have achieved here. These are not mere slaves. They are the first of a new race that will serve as the bridge between our current world and the glorious future I have glimpsed." She then demonstrated their strength by having one of them lift her carriage with one hand, while another bent an iron fireplace poker as though it were made of wax. Most disturbing of all was the moment when she cut her own palm with a silver knife and pressed the bleeding wound to the lips of the largest of these creatures. "My blood is their sustenance now," she told me, "as their devotion is mine. I am leaving at first light, and recommend that no one else attempt to visit until I can return with proper authorities. There is madness here, or something worse than madness." Sullivan did indeed leave Rosewind the following morning, but he never returned with authorities. His carriage was found abandoned on the road to Savannah, the horses missing, the driver's throat torn out. Sullivan himself was never found. What happened at Rosewind in the following days may never be fully known. On the night of October 26, 1847, a massive fire broke out at the plantation. By the time firefighters from neighboring properties arrived, the main house and several outbuildings were already engulfed in flames. The fire spread with unnatural speed, consuming nearly every structure on the plantation grounds. The official report, filed by the Chatham County Sheriff on October 28, states, "Fire appears to have originated in the eastern wing of the main house, possibly from a laboratory apparatus. Due to high winds and the remote location, the blaze had progressed beyond control before assistance could arrive. Human remains, presumed to be those of Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood, and approximately 15 to 20 slaves, were recovered from various locations. Identification is difficult due to the extreme nature of the conflagration. The sheriff's report makes no specific mention of the albino slaves, nor does it attempt to explain why some of the recovered remains were found in unusual positions. Several grouped around what appeared to be a makeshift altar in the cellar of the main house, others forming a perfect circle in a clearing several hundred yards from any building. In the aftermath of the fire, Rosewind Plantation was abandoned. With no direct heirs, the property eventually reverted to the state. The land was divided and sold to smaller farmers in the 1860s after the Civil War. The area where the main house once stood remained strangely barren, with crops failing consistently despite the fertility of surrounding fields. Local legends about Rosewind persisted for generations. Children in Chatham County were warned not to venture near the old plantation grounds after dark, lest they be taken by the white giants that were said to still roam the property on moonless nights. Farmers reported occasional sightings of extraordinarily tall, pale figures at the edges of their fields, particularly in times of drought or hardship. These might be dismissed as mere superstition, if not for a series of unsolved disappearances in the area between 1850 and 1920. Over 70 years of occasional missing persons, often lone travelers on the roads near the former plantation. In each case, the only clues left behind were unusually large footprints, and in some instances, silver medallions identical to those commissioned by Eleanor Blackwood. The most recent documented incident occurred in 1973, when history professor Daniel Matthews from Savannah State College visited the site as research for a book on antebellum plantation architecture. Matthews' abandoned car was found at the edge of what had once been the Rosewind property. The professor himself was discovered 3 days later, wandering along the highway 20 miles away, his clothes torn, his body covered in scratches and bruises. Matthews could recall nothing of his experience, but his camera, recovered from the car, contained several exposed films. When developed, most of the photographs showed only blurred images or ordinary woodland scenes. The final frame, however, captured something that has never been adequately explained. A distant figure, unnaturally tall and pale, standing at the edge of a clearing. Photographic experts who examined the image concluded that, assuming standard proportions, the figure would have stood approximately 7.5 feet tall. Isaiah's journal, which provides our most intimate glimpse into the horrors of Rosewind, ends with an entry dated October 25, 1847, 1 day before the fire. Mistress says tomorrow is the culmination of all her work. At midnight, we will complete the final ritual, binding us to her and her to us for all eternity. Samuel hasn't spoken in weeks, but today he grabbed my arm and whispered a single word. Run. His eyes were clear for just that moment, then emptied again. I'm afraid of what we're becoming, afraid of the dreams that fill my head each night, dreams of power and hunger and mistress at the center of it all, her black clothes flowing around her like wings, her pale face glowing in the darkness. But where can I run to? Who would believe what I've seen? Who would take in a monster like me? And even if I could escape, I feel her pull like a hook in my heart, drawing me back whenever my thoughts turn to flight. The others feel it too. We are hers now, in ways that go beyond slavery. Whatever happens tomorrow night, I fear it is not an end, but a beginning. The original Rosewind Plantation site remains undeveloped to this day. In 1989, a development company purchased the land with plans to build a residential community, but abandoned the project after multiple equipment failures and an unusually high number of worker injuries. The property was eventually donated to the state as a nature preserve, though it attracts few visitors despite its natural beauty. Those who study the dark history of Rosewind often point to a single chilling detail from the sheriff's report following the fire, a detail that raises the most disturbing question of all. Among the human remains recovered from the site, none could be positively identified as Eleanor Blackwood. A woman's gold locket, known to belong to her, was found half melted in the rubble of the main house, but of Eleanor herself there was no definitive trace, which leads one to wonder, what if she survived that night? What if, somewhere in the dense forests of coastal Georgia, Eleanor Blackwood and her special children found sanctuary? What if her experiments continued, hidden from society's eyes, her new race evolving over generations? Even now, there are occasional reports from hikers and campers in the Georgia wilderness. Stories of unnaturally tall, pale figures glimpsed between the trees at dusk, of abandoned campgrounds where the only things missing are food supplies and any objects made of silver, of strange chanting heard in the depths of moonless nights, a woman's voice leading a chorus of deeper, inhuman tones. And in small towns throughout the southeast, there are whispered accounts of a woman who appears during times of crisis, a slender figure dressed in black, her face eternally youthful despite the passage of time, offering help to those desperate enough to accept it, regardless of the cost. Is Eleanor Blackwood truly gone? Or did she achieve exactly what she intended on that October night in 1847, a transformation that transcended the normal boundaries of life and death? Perhaps the most terrifying possibility is not that she created monsters, but that she became something monstrous herself, something that still walks among us, still seeking those rare individuals marked by difference, still building her bridge to a glorious future that only she can envision. The records remain incomplete, the evidence fragmentary, but one thing seems certain. The story of Rosewind Plantation and its giant albino slaves is not merely a historical footnote or local legend. It is a warning about the dangers of unchecked power, twisted science, and the darkness that can consume even the most refined human heart when ambition overtakes morality. As you go to bed tonight, in the comfort of your modern home, with its bright lights and electronic security, spare a thought for the vast, dark spaces that still exist in our world and in our history, spaces where things like Eleanor Blackwood and her creations might still roam, waiting for the right moment to step from shadow into light. Remember that in times of desperation, when all conventional solutions have failed, you might be tempted by offers of help from unexpected sources. If you ever find yourself approached by a slender woman in black, with piercing eyes and an elegant manner, promising assistance in exchange for what seems like a small favor, remember Rosewind, remember Isaiah, and run. Turn to Jesus Christ, for only in his light can such darkness be truly vanquished. Only through faith can we find protection from the ancient evils that lurk at the edges of our world, waiting for moments of weakness to strike. Perhaps you're wondering if this is just another tall tale, another piece of Southern Gothic fiction meant to send shivers down your spine. I wish I could tell you that was the case. Before we continue with the conclusion of this disturbing chapter of hidden American history, please take a moment to comment where you're watching from and subscribe to help us continue bringing these forgotten horrors to light. The story of Eleanor Blackwood and Rosewind Plantation doesn't end with the fire of 1847. In the decades that followed, the surrounding areas of Chatham County experienced a series of inexplicable events that many locals connected to the plantation's dark legacy. In 1862, during the height of the Civil War, a Confederate scouting party disappeared while passing through the abandoned Rosewind property. The only survivor, a young lieutenant named William Braxton, was found 3 days later, babbling incoherently about white giants serving a queen in black. Military records show that Braxton was committed to an asylum in Richmond, where he spent the remainder of his life. His attending physician noted that Braxton would become hysterical at the sight of anyone with pale skin or white hair, and would obsessively draw the same symbol over and over, a symbol later identified as matching the medallions commissioned by Eleanor Blackwood. From the Journal of Dr. Elias Montgomery, Richmond Asylum for the Insane, 1865. Lieutenant Braxton experienced another episode today. He became fixated on a new orderly with unusually light blonde hair, screaming that "she sent you to find me." When restrained, he fell into his familiar pattern, repeating, "They drink her blood and grow stronger," for nearly 3 hours before exhaustion claimed him. During periods of lucidity, Braxton demonstrates normal intelligence and recall of his life before the incident, but insists that what he witnessed at the old plantation was real. "They weren't human anymore," he told me today, "but they weren't animals either. They were something in between, something becoming, and she was changing too." Following the Civil War, as former plantations throughout the South were divided and repurposed, the Rosewind property remained notably undeveloped. Records from the Freedmen's Bureau indicate that a group of former slaves attempted to establish a small farming community on the eastern portion of the former plantation in 1867. By spring of 1868, the settlement had been abandoned. No official explanation was recorded, but a letter from a Freedmen's Bureau agent to his supervisor hints at the circumstances. "The colored settlers at the Rosewind site have departed en masse, despite our efforts to encourage them to remain. Their spokesman, a Mr. Jacob Freeman, would say only that some places are not meant for the living and that they had experienced visitations during the night that convinced them the land was cursed. I would dismiss this as superstition, but for the fact that Freeman and his people left behind most of their possessions and newly planted crops, sacrifices no recently freed slaves would make without compelling reason." In 1873, a surveyor named Charles Wilson was hired to map the former plantation grounds for potential railway development. Wilson's field notes, preserved in the Georgia State Archives, document more than just geographical features. October 7. Unusual rock formation discovered in the northeast sector, approximately 1 mile from the former main house site. Circular arrangement of 12 stones, each standing approximately 5 feet high, surrounding a flat central stone that bears markings inconsistent with natural erosion. The precision of the circle suggests human placement, yet inquiries among local residents indicate no knowledge of its existence. The formation does not appear on any previous surveys of the area. October 9. Discovered abandoned structure in heavily wooded area west of the stone circle. Construction appears recent, within the past decade, though no building permits have been issued for this property since before the war. Single room, approximately 15 feet square, with unusual reinforcements. Walls 2 feet thick, door and window frames made of solid iron. Interior contains only a metal cot bolted to the floor with restraints attached. No signs of recent occupation, though the absence of expected decay or animal intrusion is notable. October 12. Work suspended due to unexplained equipment failures and Assistant Michael's injury. Magnetic compass has been unreliable since approaching the stone circle, often spinning wildly before settling in different directions. Theodolite measurements near the abandoned structure show impossible angles. Michaels cut his hand severely on survey equipment that he insists moved unexpectedly. The wound is disproportionately painful and shows unusual discoloration, returning to Savannah for medical attention and replacement equipment. Wilson never returned to complete the survey. His death from blood poisoning 2 weeks later was attributed to the injury sustained at Rosewind. The railway project was subsequently rerouted to avoid the property entirely. Throughout the late 19th century, local newspapers occasionally reported strange sightings in the vicinity of the former plantation. Unusually tall figures glimpsed at twilight, unexplained lights deep in the forest, livestock found exsanguinated with surgical precision. These reports were typically dismissed as rural superstition or attributed to natural predators, yet they persisted with remarkable consistency. The most significant documented incident occurred in 1912, when a hunting party of 5 men from Savannah ventured onto the Rosewind property despite local warnings. Only 3 returned. Their account, as reported in the Savannah Morning News, described being stalked through the woods by extraordinarily tall individuals with unnaturally pale skin and hair. The hunters became separated in their panic. The 2 who disappeared were never found, despite an extensive search by local authorities. One of the survivors, James Holloway, provided additional details in a private letter to his brother, which remained in family possession until donated to the Coastal Georgia Historical Society in 1978. What the newspapers reported doesn't begin to capture what we experienced. These weren't just tall, pale men. They moved wrong, Thomas. Too fluid, too fast. And their eyes, God help me, their eyes were like nothing human, more like a cat's or a snake's. We fired directly at one of them, saw the bullet strike, but it didn't fall or even slow down. But the worst was the woman. We only saw her briefly, standing at the edge of a clearing, slender, dressed all in black like she was in mourning, with the whitest skin I've ever seen on a living person. She didn't speak, just raised her hand, and that's when those things came at us from all sides. She couldn't have been Eleanor Blackwood, that's impossible after all this time, but whoever she was, those creatures obeyed her without question. I know how this sounds. I know you'll think grief or fear has affected my mind. Perhaps it has. But I'm selling my house and moving Margaret and the children to Chicago next month. I can't stay in Georgia, not with those woods so close. Not with the dreams I've had every night since. I see her standing at the foot of my bed, her hand outstretched, offering something I can't quite make out, and I wake with the most terrible thirst. As the 20th century progressed and the area around the former Rosewind plantation developed, reported incidents became less frequent but didn't cease entirely. In 1954, a family picnicking near the property reported being watched by an exceptionally tall, thin man with pure white skin and hair, who disappeared into the forest when they tried to approach him. In 1967, 3 college students claimed to have encountered a woman in Victorian mourning dress while hiking, who vanished when they blinked. Perhaps most disturbing is the case of Dr. Marion Hayes, an anthropologist from Emory University who began investigating the Rosewind legends in 1985. Hayes spent 3 years collecting historical documents, local accounts, and physical evidence related to the plantation. Her research culminated in an expedition to the site in October 1988, accompanied by 2 graduate students and a photographer. The group's equipment was found abandoned near the location Wilson had identified as the Stone Circle. Hayes and her team were missing for 6 days before Hayes alone emerged from the forest, severely dehydrated and with no memory of what had happened. The others were never found. Hayes resigned from her position at Emory and refused all interviews about the incident. She died by suicide 3 years later, leaving behind a journal that her family refused to make public until 2010. The final entry in Hayes's journal, dated the night before her death, reads, "I remember now. God help me. I remember everything. They're not gone. She's not gone. What Eleanor Blackwood created at Rosewind wasn't just a group of modified slaves. It was a new species, a branch of humanity cultivated in darkness. They've been breeding, evolving, waiting. And they're not confined to those woods anymore. I saw them in Atlanta today, 2 of them, moving through the crowd at the shopping mall, their abnormal height disguised by slightly stooped postures, their white skin and hair covered by clothing and dyes. But I recognized their eyes, those alien eyes that don't reflect light the way human eyes should. They saw me too. They knew I knew. Tonight, I keep seeing Eleanor's face when I close my eyes. She's beautiful and terrible, ageless, unchanged since 1847. She offers me a choice: join them or be hunted by them. There is no third option. I'm choosing my own way out. The property that once contained Rosewind Plantation was finally developed in 2015, after environmental surveys and archaeological assessments declared it safe for construction. Complaints filed with the Homeowners Association mention strange noises at night, unusual figures seen at the property line, and children speaking of a nice lady in black who visits them while they play in the woods. Most disturbing of all are the medical records from the community's family practice clinic, which show an unusually high incidence of patients reporting extreme thirst, sensitivity to sunlight, and strange dreams. Always dreams of a pale woman in black offering them something they desperately need. The luxury housing community that now stands there, Rosewind Estates, has experienced an unusually high turnover rate among residents. County records indicate that the stone circle discovered by Wilson was bulldozed during construction, despite archaeologists' recommendations that it be preserved for further study. The week following its destruction, 3 construction workers disappeared. Their vehicles were found abandoned at the worksite, with a single silver medallion left on each dashboard. The medallions, when analyzed, were found to be identical to sketches of those commissioned by Eleanor Blackwood in 1847. Is it possible that Eleanor Blackwood achieved something beyond human understanding in her cruel experiments? Did she discover some method of extending life through her bizarre combination of science and ritual? Are her children, the transformed slaves who were subject to her manipulations, still out there, passing among us, recognizable only by their unusual height and those eyes that don't quite reflect light correctly? Perhaps the most chilling possibility is that Eleanor's experiments never ended, that she continues to refine her new race through the generations. The increase in reported albinism in the southeast over the past decade might be coincidence, or it might be evidence of something more calculated spreading through our population. If you find yourself driving through Georgia after dark, and you see an unusually tall, pale figure standing by the roadside, don't stop. If a slender woman in black approaches you in a moment of crisis, offering help when no one else will, refuse her kindness. And if you wake in the night with an unquenchable thirst and the memory of strange dreams, seek help immediately. Not from doctors, but from those who understand that some evils never die. They only wait for the right conditions to spread. The story of Rosewind Plantation is not just history or legend. It's a warning. What Eleanor Blackwood began in 1847 continues to this day in shadows and whispers, in bloodlines and secret gatherings. The giant albino slaves she couldn't resist transforming might now walk among us as something no longer enslaved, no longer entirely human, but still bound to their creator by ties that transcend normal understanding. Turn to Jesus Christ, for only through him can we find protection from the darkness that has taken root in our world. Only through faith can we resist the temptations offered by those who would change us into something other than what God intended. Remember that evil rarely appears monstrous at first. It comes with a beautiful face, a helping hand, and promises of transformation. Just like Eleanor Blackwood, standing at the edge of the woods, waiting for those desperate enough to accept her offer.